Hi everyone. I know you're all getting ready for fall semester, so hopefully this presentation on active learning pedagogies for online inclusive virtual classrooms will help you. I gave a variation of this presentation at 2 conferences last year, but I think it will help the LAS faculty who are redesigning their courses from face-to-face to synchronous courses. And those, of course, are the Zoom courses. You have probably already figured out that it's more than recording and uploading lectures. So this is the down and dirty, the nitty-gritty structure for an interactive Zoom class. This is what the other half of my fall semester looks like. I understand that everyone is busy, and a lot of what you are going to be doing is still new. You have 5 weeks to prepare, and it's going to be a lot easier to do that preparation now rather than on a week-to-week basis when instruction starts. I'm going to use my sophomore product design history course as the sample. It's already up in the nest. You can organize your course in a variety of ways. I have a unit for each week, and I include videos and additional material on the side menu. You always want to include your Zoom link. Make your instructions as clear as possible. If you find your instructions for anything turning into long paragraphs, take a deep breath and edit. Try bullet points instead. Students get lost with long instructions, especially long instructions they have to read. You can embed links to homework, to video lectures, really to any other files. You can see here that they have been given access to their midterm guide. There are live links to their homework quiz, and there's a link to a reading from the Heilbrunn timeline. This is the side panel of that week 1 with all of the video and video lectures embedded. I use videos from YouTube as well as my own. You'll need to record your lectures as PowerPoints and then as videos in Zoom. Record to the cloud, make sure that the videos are full screen and you have enabled closed captions. Then you can embed the Zoom recording in the nest for your students. You can embed YouTube videos directly into the nest, but they won't be available if you have students in China. The Zoom recording option is a workaround. I think that my students will all be on campus and have access to YouTube, but I have included alternate routes for the YouTube videos. I won't make that visible unless I end up with a student in China. There are lots of OER, Open Educational Resources, for online teaching, and I know it can be overwhelming. Definitely check the teaching and learning sources Jean Marie has posted. I also use university teaching resource sites like the UNC Center for Faculty Excellence. They were great for inclusive classroom practices. Big universities have plowed a ton of time and money into their resources, and for the most part, they are free to the public. If you have the time, get a copy of James Lang's Small Teaching, Everyday Lessons from the Science of Teaching, and Small Teaching Online. These are really fast reads, great suggestions for incorporating minor changes that facilitate better student learning. These are little things like 1-minute reflections or anonymous polls to gauge how students think they are doing, how they understand the material. These are pedagogies that also work well in a face-to-face classroom when that time comes again. The pedagogical model for my Zoom courses is a flipped classroom. Unless you have been living under a rock, I think everyone is familiar with the terms flipped classroom and active learning. Here is my honesty disclosure. Initially, designing and prepping a flipped class requires a lot of time. I don't walk into class with lecture notes and wing anything. Since everyone is going to be recording their classes, it helps to have preparation. A successful flipped class requires a schedule and learning outcomes that are aligned with specific activities every week. Now, this may strike some of you as the kind of lesson planning that's pro forma in elementary and middle school, and you may be right there. I think of it more in terms of organizing a group meeting that generates student engagement and results in specific takeaways that the students can immediately integrate with next week's issues, with their exams, and with their studio practices. Initially, this takes a lot of work because we're not trained to design class time that way. Once you have done a couple of weeks, it goes a lot faster, it gets a lot easier. You want to make sure that whatever you have your students watch or read is connected to a specific activity, like a homework quiz or discussion topics. I hold Zoom classes for 2 hours, which I have found optimum. More than that, and students fade. Your first day class may be a little bit longer, but after that, aim for 2 hours. Their homework makes up for the additional hour, and I dedicate the extra hours to individual meetings with the students during the semester. So more on that later. Like any online course, all the readings, the videos, and my lectures are uploaded to the Nest. It's well documented that most students do better with content that they can read or listen to at their own pace. It's an inclusive practice that benefits a variety of learners. I record my PowerPoint lectures with VoiceOver. I turn them into MP4 files and then upload them to YouTube, or you can upload them to the Nest. That way, they are always available. You can make them private on YouTube if you want. Mine are public, but then I like to share. There is closed captioning on YouTube, which is really nice, but I also include the text of the PowerPoint for the students. You should definitely do this if you are not putting them on YouTube and then downloading them and saving them and re-uploading them. If you save them as MP4 files, you can also directly upload them into the Nest. Yes, this is going to take time, especially if you are accustomed to lecturing from notes, or God forbid, you walk into class without a plan. That just doesn't work in an online class, so do the prep now. Try and divide your lectures into 15 minutes, definitely never any longer than 20-minute segments. Use a lot of visuals. It's hard for students to look at the same slide for 10 minutes and listen to someone speak. Think strategically. What is the point of the lecture? What kinds of activities are you going to use to have students work with the lecture material? A flipped class is activity, not lecture-based. Lecturing in a virtual classroom is disastrous anyway. I probably speak no longer than 20 minutes throughout the 2-hour class, and that's broken up into intro and closing remarks, responses to their poll results, reviews of assignment, clarifications, and questions. The rest of the time, they are working actively with each other. A more structured classroom is considered a more inclusive classroom. Students know what they're going to be doing in class each week. They have the questions and activities ahead of time so they can prepare. There are practices in place that allow free discussion, a diversity of opinions, and fair distribution of leadership opportunities. This is a list of what I did every week to prep for classes. I'm going to go through it point by point. Luckily, I have taught this class for 4 years, so I have most of the homework, the poll, the discussion, and reflection questions archived. that takes the most time after recording your lectures. You can do this on a week-by-week basis, and that's how I started, but it's nice to have it ready to go, or as much of it ready to go as you can. So here's my sample class in the nest. This is week 6, and they're working on the Bauhaus. There are 3 learning outcomes that week. They are clear, they're measurable, they're aligned with specific activities, and they correspond to sophomore level competencies. So that's the link to Bloom's taxonomy. Their homework, the poll, and the group discussion work all directly aligns with these learning outcomes. I post the homework for week 6 in the week 5 module. I go over their homework assignments at the end of every class. I change my nest view to a student view, and I share my screen. I go through the assignment. I make sure that everyone knows what they're going to be doing, what the kind of homework they're going to be posting. I really like the nest quiz template for homework. It works better pedagogically than asking students to write a 250-word essay on what they have read. Their quizzes have between 8 and 10 questions usually. You have a variety of question formats, but I tend to use the written answer. These are short written answers. Remember that you can assign different point values to these questions. So these are just some sample questions. They're rather open-ended. I always include 1 to 2 questions that require evaluating the information with their own experiences as a student, or questions that have no right or wrong answer. Those kinds of questions encourage inclusivity and diversity. They also help students identify the relevancy of class material with their own lives and interests. We have an advantage with the Otis students because they are all studio majors. It's a lot easier to connect the material because they are all interested in making and applying meaning to different visual forms. I also like questions that encourage students to assess the consequences of their choices and positions. That really helps with critical thinking and allows for diversity. What matters here is not always their specific position, but how they arrive there and what they are willing to live with as the positive and negative consequences of it. These are all strategies that align with decolonizing the curriculum for any discipline. Some of the questions require students to deal with the information very concretely, and that would be question 6 here. Question 7 is part of a larger string of questions that continues all semester, and it's intended to help students identify their own design goals and address the pros and cons of their positions. The nest is very flexible. You can see that question 6 requires a student to post an image in their answer. You can also post images in your question. The nest is a great LMS. It has lots of options, which is why you want to play with it now in the summer when you have more time. I think that devising the homework questions and the group discussion questions takes a lot of time. It definitely paid off because I could identify whether students met the learning outcomes. It also clarified the material for them. They had the midterm and the final study guides from day 1. They could cut and paste information into those guides from discussions, from readings and homework. Their midterm is taken in class in a quiz template from the nest, so they are already familiar with the format. I did this last year and it worked very well. Homework is always due 24 hours before class, so I can grade it, make comments, and get a good sense of what they understand, where the issues are, where the gaps are. This is a screenshot from last year when I used Canoe, but the nest is very similar. The question, grade, and instructor comments are all kept together. And remember that you can speak your comments if you don't want to write them. I used the sophomore level rubric for the signature assignment, but I adapted the homework rubric that I use for UNT because it is very clear and was designed for homework questions like these. Your students should know how you are grading them, and that usually means adapting the level-specific rubrics to a particular assignment. Based on the homework and their responses, I write 4 to 6 discussion questions that further expand that week's learning outcomes. I email the learning outcomes and the questions to the students late the day before class. That way they know what they're going to be discussing. It's a small thing, it's part of inclusive learning. The discussion questions invite a variety of positions. They require the groups to present support, supply examples, and consider consequences. That helps keep discussions focused. The homework quizzes and the discussion topic questions will translate into midterm and final exam questions. I usually start class with an anonymous Zoom poll. These are yes and no or multiple choice questions. Typically, a poll takes between 2 and 3 minutes for the students to finish. These polls are very low stakes. They're like an ungraded quiz. It's a quick check on what they remember, where they were correct, what they need to mark for review. They also get an immediate sense of where they stand as a group on issues. I include questions that address weaknesses in the homework, gaps in their knowledge. Now, polls can only use multiple choice and true and false formats, but it is still helpful and the students really like using them. The anonymous poll is a good instrument for inclusivity and diversity. Students are more apt to be honest about their positions if they don't have to be identified with them all the time. Those poll results are instantly shared with the class, and they usually generate discussions within the larger group. Zoom lets you have up to 25 polls. You can always revise them, and you can archive them in Zoom. If you need more than that, you'll need to keep a document with the questions. After the poll and the poll discussion, students are ready to work on their group discussion questions. I put students into 3 breakout groups that meet for about 25 to 30 minutes, less if there are fewer questions, or you want to have a discussion about one set of group questions and then have them regroup for another discussion. I always require that they come to a group consensus on the issues. That's part of critical thinking and negotiating, and they like to work those things out among themselves. I don't snoop on these groups. I don't join these groups. I can, but this is their time to wrangle with the issues. There is always a presenter for each group, but that person is not designated initially, and after the first class, I never again ask for a volunteer. Everyone keeps notes on what their group says, and when they reconvene for reporting and discussion, I select one student from each group to report. I keep track of the weekly presenters. I rotate until everyone has reported. This is a small change. It's fair, it's equitable. It keeps the students who want to dominate in line, and it gives everyone an equal opportunity. So this is a Zoom class, a 2-hour Zoom class broken down by time and activity. Group reporting and discussions usually takes another 30 minutes. The majority of class time is students actively doing something. During the final 15 minutes, I may launch another short poll just to see how their group discussions influence their positions or change priorities about issues. I review the homework for the coming week, and I field any questions. Typically, I send an email to everyone asking for a 1-minute reflection. This is already queued up. I send it out as soon as class is over. Sometimes these reflections are about assessing their learning. Sometimes it's content-oriented. There's no grade for this, and on the average, I usually get 80% of the students to respond. These were reflection questions around midterm time, and they address student concerns before and after the midterm review session. Reflection questions would also be a good way to address student concerns about diversity, about inclusion, about race and gender issues. Anonymous polls are also good for that as well. And keep in mind that while these are important issues to address, not all students want to talk about them publicly at first, and some may never. So these reflections are private between you and the individual student. Like many of you, I build other opportunities to work with the students into the course. One class day is devoted to individual 30-minute meetings with each student to go over their paper proposals and research strategies. I'm online 15 minutes before class each week for office hours and just chatting. I give exams in class in the quiz template format. It's open book, but if students had to look up all the answers, they would run out of time. There's a review session before the midterm and the final. All the questions are developed from homework and group discussion work. This semester, I'm going to be introducing discussion boards as a space for students to anonymously post concerns or questions about the material and the class format throughout the course. I've learned a lot about online education in the past 4 years. There is no reason for anyone to reinvent the wheel. There are resources everywhere, probably so many that it's hard for newbies to know where to start. We all need to share what works and what doesn't. I've learned a lot from pedagogy conferences, from talking to faculty who are steeped in online education. Teaching at UNT in courses that meet the Quality Matters criteria, and that's the gold standard for online courses, made me rethink assignments for entry-level students. This video should give you a good idea of how to structure a synchronous course. Use what works, adapt and revise, but start now because it takes time. And share what is and is not working. That kind of pedagogical networking is so important to all of us. Happy teaching, stay well.